The Pope is said to be the successor of St. Peter and the vicar of Christ on earth. But what does that mean? What exactly are the limits and bounds of papal power? Does the Pope have infallible authority in all matters of faith and morals? And what about those times when the Pope appears to have made a mistake or even sinned himself? So let's take a look at the nature of papal authority and whether or not the Pope can ever truly err.
The Catholic Church teaches that the Pope, by divine institution, has full, supreme, and universal jurisdiction over the faithful. This means that the Pope has ultimate legislative, executive, and judicial authority in the Church. In other words, the Pope has the final say on all matters relating to faith and morals for all Catholics everywhere. This teaching is based on the words of Jesus Christ himself, who said to Peter, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." However, this doesn't mean that the Pope has absolute power over everything. For example, the Pope cannot force someone to convert to Christianity or to participate in religious activities. Nor can the Pope tell people how to vote in elections or which political party to join. In matters concerning civil society, the Pope is not considered to have any special authority. Rather, he is simply seen as a religious leader who can offer guidance and counsel to politicians and citizens alike. The Second Vatican Council also taught that the Pope does not have infallible authority when speaking on matters of social, political, or economic doctrine. This is because these are areas where the Church does not have a definitive moral teaching. Therefore, the Pope is free to make mistakes or to hold opinions that are not in line with those of the Church. In such cases, the Pope would be speaking as an individual person, rather than as the head of the Church. But when it comes to matters of faith and morals, the situation is quite different. Here, the Church does have a definitive teaching, and therefore the Pope cannot err when speaking ex cathedra, that is, from the chair of St. Peter. This means that when the Pope speaks authoritatively on matters of faith and morals, he is immune from error. This infallibility is not something that the Pope can claim for himself, but it is a gift from God that he receives in order to teach the true faith. It is important to note that papal infallibility only applies to teachings that are proposed as divinely revealed truths. If the Pope were to teach something that is not in line with Church teaching, then he would be considered to be teaching his own opinion rather than the teaching of the Church. In this case, the Pope would not be considered to be infallible. So if the Pope is infallible, then why do we sometimes see him making what appear to be mistakes? There are two possible explanations for this. First, it could be that the Pope is deliberately allowing himself to be misunderstood in order to avoid giving offense. For example, when Pope Francis met with a group of children in 2013, he was asked by one of them, "Why did God create so many countries if he wanted everyone to live together in peace?" In response, Pope Francis said, "God created different races so that we would get to know one another better and learn to live with one another." Some people took this statement to mean that the Pope believes that racism is good, when in fact, he was simply trying to emphasize the need for interracial harmony. Another example of this can be seen in the Pope's response to a question about homosexuality. In 2013, he said that if a person is gay and is trying to live according to God's plan, they should be treated with tenderness. Again, some people interpreted this as the Pope endorsing homosexuality, when in reality, he was simply saying that homosexual people should still be loved and respected, even if they are not living according to the Church's teachings. The second explanation is that the Pope may genuinely make mistakes. This is because the Catholic Church does not teach that the Pope is immune from error in matters of faith and morals when he is not speaking ex cathedra. In other words, if the Pope is not speaking as the supreme teacher of the faith, then he can err just like anyone else. For example, in 2009, Pope Benedict XVI lifted the excommunication of 4 bishops who had consecrated women priests without permission from the Vatican. This decision was later reversed by Pope Francis, who stated that the previous pope had erred in his understanding of the Church as teaching on the priesthood.
In this case, it seems clear that Pope Benedict genuinely made a mistake and that Pope Francis was correcting him. However, this does not mean that either pope was any less holy or any less of a successor of Peter. Some people argue that if the pope is truly infallible, then he cannot sin. However, this argument ignores the fact that the Catholic Church teaches that the pope is just a human being who is prone to sin. In fact, the Second Vatican Council explicitly stated that the pope, along with all other members of the Church, is called to holiness, but can fall away from it. Moreover, the Church has never taught that the Pope is immune from the effects of original sin. Therefore, it is incorrect to say that the Pope is incapable of sinning. This should not be surprising, since every person is capable of sinning regardless of their status in the Church or in society. Now, what happens if the Pope commits a sin? According to the Catholic Church, the Pope, like any other bishop, is subject to the law of the Church. This means that if the Pope commits a grave sin, he can be removed from office through a process known as papal resignation. However, this has never happened in history. The only time a pope resigned was in 2013, when Pope Benedict XVI stepped down due to health reasons. The Catholic Church also teaches that if the Pope commits a heresy, that is a denial or corruption of revealed truth, he can be deposed by a council of bishops. Again, this has never happened in history. In conclusion, the Pope does not have infallible authority in all matters, but only when speaking ex cathedra on matters of faith and morals. When the Pope makes mistakes, it is either because he is deliberately trying to avoid giving offense, or because he is not speaking as the supreme teacher of the faith. The Pope, like all other Christians, is called to holiness, but he can also fall away from it and commit sins. If the Pope commits a grave sin, he can be removed from office, but this has never happened in history. The Pope is the successor of Peter and the vicar of Christ on earth, but he is still just a human being who is capable of making mistakes and committing sins. We should remember this next time we hear him speak and strive to be more charitable towards him and towards ourselves. So do you think that the Pope is infallible? Do you think that he can ever truly err? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.